All right. You know what it is. You know who it is. We're back. Jerry just told me I was wearing the same thing as I was last week.
At
So
least I think you
it's-
were. I don't know if I remember that correctly.
I don't remember, but in case I was, this is a new episode. This is not the same episode as last week. It's not a continuation. Jerry's looking like a stepdad. He's got
Oh
his,
yeah, we're stepdad.
he's got the tank top with the gold chain,
Any
stash
moms out
around
there who
that.
are looking for a father figure for their little ones? I'm a great example of a man.
It's a great example. Drinks his 3D energy and does it.
Right in the morning, pack of cigarettes, 3D energy, monster.
Back
Golden rule, pack of cigarettes before 9 a.m.
that's
Whole pack.
the whole pack.
Whole pack. Not just some, not two or three. Be a man. Whole
Damn,
pack of cigarettes.
whole pack of cigarettes. That's breakfast. That's
That's
balanced
that's for
breakfast.
breakfast.
Yes,
Yeah.
balanced
That's for
breakfast is egg,
pre-workout.
bacon, pack of cigarettes, and a white monster.
And you mix the white monster with some bacon grease.
Yes, yes, exactly. So today we are going to be diving into a review of the last 3 weeks, which we covered. We covered a lot of information. So what I want to do is I want to go over all that stuff, kind of put it in a nice box and bow and put the final things on it and then get into conditioning, which we'll dive into next. Well, let me say this, Jerry, if it does start to freeze, guys, if it does start to freeze, let me know. Well, Jerry, let me know.
It's
Should
it's looking a lot better today. But the
so
recording was fine. It's just my end. So we
yeah.
should be good.
So week one, we talked about basically breaking down training. And this is going to be a little bit of a faster breakdown of everything just because I want to, again, it's a quick review. But week one talked about days per week. So we had 2, 3, 4, 5, and even 6 days. Those 2 days are going to look more, and if there's anything I miss out on, Jerry, obviously fill in or correct me, but those two
Hmm.
days are going to look like full body days, trying to cover those main movement patterns. So might look like squat, push, pull, hinge, core, and carry on day one, or in that same thing on day two, just covering different movements and aspects of those, or we might see an upper and lower on those days. Really, it just kind of depends on your preference of what you enjoy doing. If you like giving all that focus to one and as opposed to the other, that's cool. 3 days, this is where we had a couple different tweaks and things that we wanted to do, which were either it could be push pull legs, or it could be full push pull full body, or we even talked about I believe it was push like upper lower conditioning, right? Those are the three that we talked about there.
We talked about upper lower conditioning. We talked about legs push pull or push pull legs, whichever order. And then we also talked about upper lower full with
Okay.
conditioning like in there some point.
Yeah. And then so that was the options there. Then 4 days we talked about splitting things up a little bit more, or what I would say like specializing, or I guess yeah, I guess specializing on those days or getting a little bit more specific with the patterns, where instead of doing, you know, full body days, this is where we can start to focus just on pushing, just on pulling, just on like knee hinge movements, just on hip hinge movements, that type of thing. And we can start to get a little bit more specific and work on these muscles a little bit more. Uh, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm drawing a blank. I feel like there's a word I'm not using that is better for that.
I feel like it's just like you're working on the muscles more with more intention to fatigue them. And
Yeah.
with more specificity on one group.
Yeah.
That's
But
yeah.
anyway, so yeah, so as we start to add more days, 4, 5, and 6 days during the week, that's when we start to be able to break things down a little bit more, make that program a little bit more specialized as opposed or in regards to maybe we have a chest day, maybe we have a back day, maybe we have a leg day, maybe we have a shoulder day, that type of thing, where we start to really focus on each of these pieces a little bit more in depth, as opposed to maybe 2 days a week we might have, dumbbell bench. A 4 day a week chest workout might look like bench, flies, push-ups, whatever it might be, but multiple exercises inside of a single session that are targeting one area of the body, right? This allows us to do more damage, not bad damage, but obviously like adaptation damage to the muscle fiber, so it has to grow. And it also allows us to kind of max out the strength gains as well because we're just focusing on that one thing during the session. So we don't have to worry about any other exercises on that day, right? That's one of the downsides of a full body session is we're going to start to see a lack of being able to fully maximize each movement because there's such big patterns that we start to see inside of the full body exercises that really we're not really able to what we would normally say like max effort sets. We're not able to express that during those sessions, right? And then the same thing, like I said, 5 and 6 days. The only difference we really talked about, I believe, on the 5 and 6 days was that personally I like to add in some extra conditioning days, especially on six. And I believe the other thing we talked about was uh,
Mobility days.
mobility, yeah. Mobility on top of those as well. And basically taking that 4 day model and just sprinkling in either a mobility day in there or an extra conditioning day or having two conditioning days. And those are really the only things that, I think we change as we get higher in those days. Obviously, again, for the 5 and even 6 day ones, if you do want to just lift and you're not interested in conditioning, uh, you know, probably not the best idea, but if it's not, right? And that's all you're interested in, then it might look like push pull legs, right? Or something along those lines. It could be like upper lower full body type thing. You can spread that out across the week. And then the same thing for 5 days, whatever makes the most sense. And realistically, whatever that you feel is ideal for you inside of those days or whatever you want to focus on. Like recently for me, with the as much running as I've been doing, I haven't been doing as much legs just because, one day of legs can trash the running for the entire week. So I've been adding in a couple extra, upper body days or just focusing on the legs in a different capacity than I'm usually used to. And like I said, that stuff changes as the program changes. So that's where the adaptation comes in. From there, we talked about sets and reps, right? So the sets and reps, again, very general in the way that we went over it, but we're talking 5 by 5, 4 by 6, 3 by 10 to 12, 2 by 20, even the power sets or the speed sets like 8 by 2 to 3, something like that. And as we talked about it before, the intention is super important inside of those sets, right? And that's where we kind of came with the next episode when we talked about rest is, the rest essentially allows us to keep the intent or the stimulus that we need inside of those sessions, right? If we have a 5 by 5 on a bench, we don't want to be resting 30 seconds to 60 seconds when we're trying to fully maximize the strength output of that exercise, right? That's where the 2, 3, 4, even 5 minute rest sometimes for those strength exercises comes in. And again, as we get lower in that rest, we're probably looking at a different stimulus that's going on inside of those sessions, right? Most main movers of, let's say you're working out 4 days a week, those first couple movements might fall into that 5 by 5, 4 by 6, that type of strength, right? Might even look at like a 5 by 3. There's obviously, again, very general, but like the idea here is anywhere from like what? I mean, I guess we could throw one rep max in there, but not ideally. Anywhere from like two to I'd say like 6 reps would be in those like main moving exercises. Obviously, you can do more reps if you'd like, if you're at a phase of like where you're trying to, grow muscle or whatever. But I think in terms of like getting stronger, anywhere from 2 to 6 reps and anywhere from that 3 to 5 set range is going to be ideal with about I guess we can say 2 to 5 minutes of rest, depending on how much you need inside of each of those sets, right? And then as those sessions progress, the movements get less and less intense. And that's where the rep ranges kind of translate that or show us that inside that with the sets and the reps that go along with that. So those first couple movements might be 5 by 5, 4 by 6. Then after that, we start to maybe look at a couple 3 by 10 to 12 type movements. Then maybe a couple like 2 by 20 or 2 by 30, something like that. And then even like static holds or carries or just basic patterns from there. Anything I missed there?
No, that was spot on.
Cool.
We did not put the timer on, but I didn't want to say anything because that might be taking resources from your computer, affecting the connection. So I was like, screw it. Let's just try it
Okay.
without it.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
let's lease things while I'm here in Brazil as possible.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi
Keep things pretty streamlined, yeah.
is what we'd call back in the day Kmart Wi-Fi.
Ooh, that's a throw. Does Kmart exist still?
I think there's one more store in like the middle of the country.
They're just holding on.
Yeah.
It's the hangnail of the supermarket.
I just remember one of the insults of like prime video gaming era was, "Are you playing at Kmart right now?" Because the
Really?
connection was so bad.
Dude, I don't think I ever used that.
I don't know. There's
Are you
like,
playing at Kmart right now?
I don't know. It's just
Damn.
something I always heard. But anyways, so from there, we talked about obviously the rest periods, and as we said, those high strength output sessions or those high strength output movements require a lot of rest. So that's where we're going to start to see anywhere from those 2 to 5 minute intervals of rest. Then from there, when we're getting into the accessory movements, when we're getting into those supporting exercises, that's when we might see 60 to say 2 minute, 60 second to 2 minute rest, or even 60 to 90 seconds. I think the range that I originally said was 30 to 90 seconds. And then from there, we might even look at like 30 to 60 seconds as we start to get into those, easier skill movements that aren't as high physical output, right? And we can like more repetition effort or repetitive types of movements. That's when we can start to lower the rest a little bit because the output's not as high. So we're not going to need as much recovery to do it. And then we start to go from there. And again, the rest really, like the biggest thing with the rest is just stick with the stimulus. That's the only thing I can tell you that's consistent on how to pick the rest. If you're doing something and you want to get stronger, you're going to want extra rest, right? If you're doing things and you want to, kind of get that stimulus of like hypertrophy or that burn, you're going to want to rest a little bit less, right? And the biggest thing I can tell you is just the more rest, the more weight or work you're going to be able to accomplish for the most part, right? It doesn't, and again, it doesn't automatically mean if you just do 5 by 5 bench that you're doing strength sets if you're resting 30 seconds and you're not actually able to fully maximize the weights that you're working with. So, I think that was a short summary. I believe that was everything, right?
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah. So, like I
Well,
said,
dude, our timer would have been really proud. Our
yeah,
timer.
I really would've. That
Yeah.
was probably like, I don't know when we started this,
I think it
but
was like probably 6 minutes,
yeah, yeah, something like
six
that.
or 7 minutes. That's pretty
Yeah,
good.
it's good. But yeah, I think if there's any other questions you guys have about that stuff, like definitely reach out, let us know because we can answer these a little bit more specific to you, right? Like these are very general overlaying qualities that we're speaking of right now. But again, it might be different for me as it is for Jerry, like Jerry is a little bit of a longer limbed person. His recovery time from a bench press might be a little bit different from mine. So it's like he might need 4 minutes, I might need 3 minutes, like that type of thing. We can ask the right questions so we can kind of guide you in that position to let you know, one where we're at and what or one where you're at and how we can kind of help you get that stimulus better or just improve the programming overall. Anything to add to that?
Just to like touch on that last point, if you are like kind of confused about what your rest periods should be, a good way to look at it, like if you feel like you're going into your next set of like a max effort thing and you're in like the 4 to 5 rep range, or maybe even like that 2 to 3, and you feel like your heart rate's still elevated, you might need to look into maybe adding a little more conditioning so you can get some better heart rate recovery. So they all go hand in hand. So those are questions that you should ask us too.
Yeah, and I think good segue because what I want to talk about next in today's episode and over the next couple of weeks is
You like
conditioning.
that? You
Yeah,
like that?
I don't know if that was intentional or
Yeah.
not, but
It was intentional. It was very good.
so I want to talk about conditioning, and today I want to talk about the difference. I want to start off by talking about the different types of conditioning, right? Because I think there's something to be said about conditioning in the world that I'm in sometimes, right? With me being in the world of like high performing athletes, I think it bothers me because I see people throw around the word conditioning all the time and not understanding there is like two kinds of conditioning, right? Like to me, there's performance conditioning and then there's general health conditioning, right? And those are two very different things, right? And even to take that a step further, in regards to like understanding this a little bit more. One thing I was taught very early on was there's a continuum of health, right? And essentially it's like a half circle. And on that continuum, there's health and then there's sickness, right? And I think a lot of the times when we start to look at fitness and we start to look at these people who, are either the most high performing athletes, the best looking athletes, that type of thing, we automatically equate them with health, right? And that's not always the case. And why I say that is because a lot of the practices that it takes, and when I say practices, like daily habits, you know, uh, in regards to fighting, right? Like the weight cuts, things like that, like things that are just a part of the sports are not inherently healthy, right? And conditioning falls into that same thing. And I think a lot of times when we look at athletes and we look at the way they look, the way they talk, the money they make, we just assume like they're healthy, right? And that's again, it's not always the case. It's just performance requires you to push past a certain limit, and that limit is past the limit of health overall. And that's why I think a lot of these guys they don't have real habits, real fitness habits. There's very few. In today's world, it's a lot it's a lot more common to see people being healthy post career than it was in the past, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with obviously the science, the lifestyle, that type of thing, where a lot of these guys before were just kind of doing the sport and then that was it, right? And I say that because it's going to help you understand the whole performance and general health conditioning concept, right? So to me, like I said, there's health conditioning and then there's performance conditioning. Health conditioning is really basic patterns of movement, right? Low skill, high repeatability, high sustainability, and the stimulus or the goal is to improve function of the body, right? Overall, I think at the end of the day, real conditioning or real general population conditioning is to improve lung health, heart health, blood flow, oxygen intake, all that stuff, right? And do you agree with this, Jerry? Like, is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, it's good.
Yeah. So I think that general health conditioning is something that when we talk about it, it is way different than what people think it is, right? Because I think when we look at people who do conditioning and they're not athletes or they're not competing for anything, you often get this like bike sprint mentality or this, I got to be dying at the end of a session for it to be working. And CrossFit, when CrossFit was very big and I first got involved in CrossFit, this is, one of the things where I was taught that or I wasn't taught, I guess it was just kind of implied that conditioning was dying, essentially. Like you had to be feeling
Mhm.
like that burn or that burning lung sensation that like caused you to get better conditioning, right? And when you look at it and you actually understand conditioning and you look at it from like a health perspective, right? And I think one of the problems with a lot of this is that like the perspective of health nowadays is so like all over the place that it's very hard to actually understand like what do we actually need to be healthy, right? And I think that a lot of today's health is centered around a six pack. It's centered around muscles. It's centered around, like I said, performance, that type of thing. When in reality, not to say that that stuff's not important, right? And obviously, like being lean and having a six pack, they're things that show health and they're things that show you work hard and that you take care of yourself, right? But they're not prime movers of health. And I think that sometimes the way that people commit to getting these types of things is not health. And that's a conversation for a different time, but I just want to preface this by saying that so you understand a little bit more as we dive into this stuff, right? So I think, with conditioning, I just want to pull one thing up because I had
While you're while you're
yeah,
pulling that up, I do want to add for like the layman's person, conditioning is literally just like cardio, but with a purpose. Like there's usually like reps or sets or timed intervals. Like when people say like, "Oh, I went to the gym and did cardio," usually what I think is like they mindlessly did the stairmaster or walked or whatever. If you have conditioning, there's a plan and a purpose and a result you're trying to achieve from that. So conditioning is just our way of saying like cardio with purpose.
yeah, exactly, right. And one of the things I wrote down a couple different things that if you guys are a part, or if you listen in your in my daily discipline channel on my Instagram, I kind of already talked about this a little bit, and I wanted to start making some episodes along with it so I can explain it a little bit more in detail. So basically, I defined conditioning for performance as conditioning with the intent of completing a certain task at the highest physical capacity, right? Conditioning for performance is saying, I need to do X. How do I do it in the highest capacity, right? I have a race, I have a fight, I have a game, and it's there's parameters around what success is inside of that, whether it be time, whether it be task dependent, whether it be output dependent, whatever it might be. There's parameters that are showing us success and giving us kind of like a framework of like, I need to do this to be successful in this, right? And that's where conditioning for performance kind of for me is defined. It's a specific task, right? Conditioning for health, what I wrote down was conditioning with intent of of improving overall capacity and function of the body, heart, lungs, etc. Right? And to me, that makes a lot more sense because when you start to look at conditioning and you start to actually understand like what it is, it's not this high, we could call anaerobic or, high output phase of conditioning. It's repeatable efforts. It's breathing, nasal breathing, sustainable, repeatable. Like I think the biggest thing that we take for granted inside conditioning is that you should feel good at the end of a nice conditioning session, right? It should be a walk. It should be a hike. It should be 30 minutes on the bike. It should be um, even a light jog if you're at that level. But I think that when we look at health being a foundation of what we do, there's this is health, right? And then when we flip on the flip side, we go back to the performance conditioning. Conditioning with the intent of completing a certain task at the highest physical capacity means we don't care, or not that we don't care, but it's like we have to push past that health stimulus so that we can perform at the highest level, right? You might not be recovering properly. You're gonna probably get some lactate in the body. You're probably gonna start to feel that burning sensation, that type of thing. And that's not somewhere we want to live, right? We don't want to always be in that feeling. And this is where a lot of the problems come in general exercise, is that too many people, and me and Jerry have talked about this in the past, but too many people are trying to chase a feeling as opposed to doing solid work that actually gives us the ability to get better at what we're doing, right? And I think that with many with many of our training principles that we've talked about, health is the foundation, right? And in my eyes, for an athlete, for them to fully maximize like threshold training or to fully maximize performance for conditioning, they have to get really good at performance or conditioning for health. Does that make sense? Like you
Yeah.
have to, we want to start to look at conditioning for health as like the foundation. And then as we start to get closer, we start to build on top of that aerobic base of conditioning for health. And we start to add on top of that to get higher and higher for that threshold.
I think
I,
conditioning for health is, like you said, it's building that aerobic base because a lot of people don't have the level of conditioning that they need. So like if you did want to perform and like let's say you've been sedentary for a while and you will take fighting for example, you're like, yeah, I'm going to start training and I want to fight. That's a lot of cardiac output, right? So like that's moving in a very intense effort for a long period of time. To just jump right into that is a lot. So being able to say that you've built a healthy foundation, a good aerobic base, so you can at least function on those lower levels, that'll allow you to start training at a higher level without crashing.
yeah. And
Yeah.
essentially, like I said, conditioning for health literally just improves functions of the body, right? It improves the amount of oxygen we're taking in. It improves the way that our lungs intake the oxygen and expel CO2. It improves the amount of actual oxygen in the blood, right? It improves all of these different aspects in our efficiency of using it so that when we have to go into these performance-based conditioning sessions, then we're able to utilize the qualities that we've trained inside of the health conditioning to further push that threshold so we can actually get further inside of our conditioning, right? Because when we look at performance, there's people pushing every single day. And that's the whole point of it is like we're trying to set ourselves apart from the rest of the competition when we go into that conditioning section. the problem that I see oftentimes in this and why I want to talk about it is that there's kind of this misunderstanding of what conditioning is. And people just think, oh, well, I can just do sprints for 4 weeks and I'll be fine. Or I'll just hop on an
Hmm.
assault bike. That's my favorite. It's like, oh, I'll just do 10-second sprints for 4 weeks and then my conditioning will be there. There is evidence, right? There is evidence that shows that type of anaerobic training does improve your conditioning overall. But in my experience with the athletes that I've worked with, having a base is for long-term health is or training conditioning for health in the right stimulus long term helps them, but also it helps them with increasing that threshold, right? And I think that when we look at the concept of programming for conditioning, we oftentimes see that you know the goal with conditioning for health is, like I said, it's repeated, sustained, low skill efforts that allow us to they allow us to complete work at a given duration, right? And this type of conditioning may not be, you know, used in when we're competing or use anything like that, but it's also going to allow us to fully maximize, like I said, the efficiencies that we have inside of the body, right? I think one of the biggest things that I start to see inside of health conditioning is that it if it's done in the right way, it like literally going back to what we talked about in the beginning, it literally enhances every single aspect of your training, right? Your strength training gets better because you need less time to recover. Because you need less time to recover, that means the recovery that you do get is even more or is better and even more maximized, which allows you higher outputs and higher stimuluses on everything else that you do, right? And I noticed this when I first started and when I first really kind of learned about the concept of like organizing conditioning in a way that is similar to strength training, right? Because for the longest time, I just kind of was like, okay, well, conditioning gets done by either, running or it gets done by doing really hard things that you just kind of like can't breathe at the end of. And then I started to look at, when I was taught I guess the the benefits of aerobic, like true aerobic training, and I just never looked back because it just made so much sense, right? It just made so much sense that you have to improve the base before you try to build anything up on top of it, right? And I think that like when we talk about health conditioning, the I think one of the couple things, because I think what I want to do today, I want to dive just a little bit deeper into this. And then next time what we're going to do is we're going to break down like the specifics of what each of these look like and some example workouts that you guys can kind of break down or we can talk about, and I can break down a little bit more on here about like why they're different and why the differences are there. But like when we talk about real aerobic threshold training, right? This can really be defined as like I have like three different types of differences that I usually see in regards to like conditioning for performance as opposed to conditioning for health, right? One is skill level, two is specificity, and then three is truly like threshold training, right? And one being the skill. So like for example, a regular health for conditioning thing might be, or for conditioning piece or session might be 30 minutes on the bike at a sustainable pace, right? For a performance session, it might be, you know, minute on the bike, minute on the row, minute on the ski at specific outputs. And, these are different modalities. So we're changing the pace, we're changing the exercise, we're changing the thought process, and the skill level goes up, right? Basically, what I mean by that is like mixed modality, throwing in, for example, in CrossFit era was like we might have bike sprints with snatches or bike work with running with push-ups with burp, like something like that, right? So the skill is a huge one. Specificity, and this is another big one. In general conditioning, we're oftentimes kind of just moving as the goal. And in performance conditioning, especially in regards to like MMA, for example, there's 5 minute rounds, right? So we want to start to really specify how we're going to go from X to 5 minute rounds, right? Wherever it is that we start with, wherever it is that we're at, we want to bring that down so that 5 minutes is as efficient and as effective and as high output as possible, while also recovering inside of that minute that you get to rest and doing it again for, eventually, hopefully 5 rounds, meaning you're at championship level or main event level, right? And again, you know, with the specificity, we might look to change like the layout and the structure of our training. And this just, again, this is just going to be like to better suit the demands of the sport or whatever it is that we are doing. And this is where we start to talk about ideas, which we'll talk about more race pace theory, time intervals, specific movements, that type of thing, right? And then the third is going to be threshold training. And again, these are the differences that I see inside of performance and regular health conditioning. So threshold training to me is probably the greatest difference because what we're going to see in health is that there's going to be a limit, right? And that limit's going to be kind of one to nasal breathing, and two, we're not trying to reach that point uh of what's the word I'm looking for? Like fatigue, right? We don't want to reach a level of fatigue in the body that we're starting to burn, we're starting to feel that, like that how would you describe it? Like
The
that.
like
Go
that
ahead.
big metabolic effect. You like
Yeah,
the one
yeah,
that you
yeah.
feel like when you're doing anything really hard. That the burning, that like maybe you feel it in the lungs and the muscles. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the type of thing where when we start to look at this stuff, we want to avoid that for health. For threshold training or for performance training, we have to push past that, right? Because we can't have athletes who are competing at the highest level not understand what it feels like to be in that state and have to continue to move forward, right? So in performance training, the biggest goal, obviously, again, is output. So we need to push the limits of our capacity. So realistically, it might look the same here, and then health conditioning stops around here. And that threshold training is where we're kind of like, okay, this is our threshold right now. We're going to go past it, and then we're going to come back down. And then we're going to come past it again a little bit further. And we're going to come back down. And as that happens, this starts to raise with it. And as that raises with it, our threshold becomes a little bit higher as well. But that threshold from here to about here, even though it might be small in percentage and time and output, is such a big central nervous system effect and has such a big impact on our body that we can only do it for short amounts of time, right? We don't want to be doing this type of training year round without any type of pullback from it because that's when we start to get injuries. That's when we start to get CNS fatigue. That's when we start to get these overtraining type stimulus um, or side effects of training, right? But with this, we're always going to be pushing the line on what we're capable of for athletes inside of our conditioning. And that's really the biggest difference, right? And like I said, the performance training is oftentimes like pushing our limits and having specific demands and trying to get the highest return possible inside of our conditioning, right? And health training is improving the body's capacity and in a sustainable framework that allows us to even more, I guess, improve the output of threshold training. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
If you want to think of it visually, if you ever play like the video games where you're trying to level up your health and stamina bar, you get those little packs along the way. That
Yeah,
threshold training allows you to increase that stamina bar just
yeah,
more and more. So
yeah,
you're just becoming more powerful, more athletic and healthy over time.
yeah.
That's it.
And I think this is again, I think this is an important distinction to make because if we don't define these and we don't give them actual definitions, this is when people start to just say, "Oh, conditioning is conditioning is conditioning," right?
Hmm.
If conditioning, if conditioning helps an athlete improve their capacity, and it's this type of structure, then it's probably going to help general population. And while it might, it's not, general population doesn't need to be in that setting, and there's really no need for them to ever do that type of training unless they want to, right? Because it's realistically it's damaging to the body long term, and you can't do it for.
Hmm.
And I think that this is where, it's important to have these conversations because, I've had so many people in the past, even when I had Thrive, like when I first had Thrive, my first gym, there were so many people who just wanted to feel that burn, right? And it was so important. It was such a weird thing to me because when I started CrossFit, I had never really done any, I guess, structured type of conditioning, right? and that was the first time I'd done any type of structured conditioning, and it felt it didn't feel sustainable, right? It didn't feel like something I could continue to do. I did it, I got through it, but it was a lot of times like as I learned this new concept of structuring it in a sustainable way, this is when I really went back and I was like, wait a second, like this makes so much more sense to have something that builds up over time. And then when you need to, or when you have a specific competition, you push the pace a little more and you raise it, right? And the thing is with sustainable conditioning is like this is something you can do for the rest of your life, right? So if you do this in the right way and you progress it over time, you're going to continuously build that stimulus and build that capacity so that your threshold goes up, right? The thing that I see with threshold training without aerobic capacity or without that, I guess, long endurance work where you're just kind of like moving, right? You're able to raise threshold training with threshold training to a certain extent, right? Eventually there's going to be a stopping point, whether it be capacity, skill, whatever the limitations are in your body, that you're not going to be able to raise it that much higher due to whatever is in the way. And that's when the capacity training really helps us, right? And like I said, from a strength training perspective, if we're talking about just general health, doing regular health conditioning literally helps every single aspect of your life, right?
Mhm.
And I think that people don't understand it until they do it. And it's crazy because I've introduced this topic to so many people, and you kind of think like, oh, okay, well, this is very, it's, pretty simple concept. It's like just keep moving for an extended period of time, nasal breathe, that type of thing. But then you go and talk to people, and I see people struggle more with moving consistently for 30 minutes, meaning no stopping, just nasal breathing at a slow, steady pace, struggle way more than they do with bike sprints or anything like that, right? Because it's so underappreciated how difficult it is to sustain pace for an extended period of time, right? And I think that once you start to do it and you start to learn, it only improves the awareness of it and obviously only improves the capabilities that you have physically. Um, yeah. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to reiterate that having like an actual plan going into it is what's going to help the most. If you just do things at random, just like strength, if you don't have a program, just go in there and do things at random. Like I feel like doing chest today. Let's see what exercises I want to do, what rep ranges we'll figure out. That won't work. Same thing with conditioning. You got to go in with a plan. This way you actually know what your working sets are. You know what your rest is. You know if you're nasal breathing. And then obviously based on those, we're trying to reach a certain outcome.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think I want to cut it there for today. Because we definitely just dove into a lot of information about conditioning. I think next week, what I want to talk about a little bit more is what it, what differences in a workout might look like. I want to talk about what it looks like to do each of them because I think that's another big thing. Just like I think one of the things with conditioning is the look of someone doing aerobic versus threshold training is completely different, right? And I think that the facial expressions, the body language, that type of thing is completely different. So I want to dive into that. And then I also want to dive in a little bit into what workouts might look specifically for someone who's an athlete versus someone who's just trying to stay fit. So if there's not anything to add to that, I appreciate
Oh,
you guys for tuning in. What?
one last thing. Don't
Yeah,
forget your energy drink, your pack of cigarettes first
yeah,
thing in the morning before 9 a.m. at least, and then you're ready to crush your day.
yeah,
Now
cigarette.
we'll get the outro going. We're
I
ready.
usually I usually like to do my aerobic capacity training with a cigarette in my mouth.
Yeah. Or you just like you chug a whole monster without taking a breath in between.
Yeah,
That's
that's
some good
conditioning.
intervals right there.
That's conditioning. That's what would you call it? That's oxygen restriction training.
Yes, of course. That's like instead of getting the mask that doesn't work and people still buy, you just you get the
Just
monster.
makes it harder to breathe.
Dude, we should do that. We should actually go over like fitness shit that's a waste of money. We should do a whole podcast on that.
We could do it.
Yeah, that'd be great. But
Talk,
anyway,
but
we'll
this
get
is
the outro.
first. This is more important
Yes,
first.
this is obviously more important.
But I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Again, today we talked about the review of basically what we talked about the last couple of weeks. Training days, how you plan those out, sets and reps, and rest. And then we began the conversation defining health conditioning from performance conditioning. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.